breaking barriers and bridging the gaps between patients and doctors. Welcome to Brainstorming with the Docs and your co-hosts, Dr. Glenn Harrison and Dr. Kolby Condos.
All right, everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Brainstorming with the Docs. I'm Dr. Kolby Condos, my co-host, Dr. Glenn Harrison, the man across the other side of the screen here. And today we are talking about something that we get asked often and frequently in our clinics, and that is about heavy metal detox, or heavy metal toxicity.
Heavy metal, yeah.
Heavy metalers, dude. So if this is something that you have questions about, or a friend or family or a loved one has issues with heavy metal toxicity, and you have questions on it, you're going to want to listen to this. We're going to make it really clear and concise and abbreviated so that you can find some of the information that you need to know prior to starting a heavy metal detox, so that if you decide to go forward, you're armed with all the information that you need to do so. If this is your first time listening or watching the podcast and you have questions about your own health, make sure you hit like and subscribe, turn on notifications so that in the future when we come out with more information, you are the first to access that. So without further ado, let's just get started right away. Heavy metals, man, we experience these frequently in our lives. I think that if you were to check our blood work, a lot of us would actually have heavy metals that we were unaware of. What are some potential sources where people actually get heavy metals?
I completely agree. We were talking about this before we started, and I get people all the time coming in with two concerns, and that's why I think this podcast is important. Two concerns. Either they come in with a bunch of labs showing heavy metals and they're in panic mode. That's number one. Or number two, they've got a bunch of health issues. They've heard about something somewhere and they believe, and they heard all the nightmares of heavy metals and heavy metal toxicity, and then they want to test. And I always have this conversation with them. And if I feel that, and I know you do as well, Dr. Kolby, so I wanted to put it out in the open of what we see in research and what we see clinically, and what people should know and what people should maybe avoid or not panic about, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
So maybe the first thing is the exposure. Well, where are we getting exposed to heavy metals? What do you see in the environment?
You get it from a whole variety of areas.
Where are you not getting it from?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Literally, if we tested, I think probably all of us would have heavy metals in our system at any one time. But I think if you look at things like tuna fish, we can get it from fish. We can get it from environmental exposure, so industrial type stuff. So welders would be a potential source of contamination for heavy metals.
In any kind of industry.
Exactly. Yep.
Exactly. And even around enough exhaust chemicals and exhaust fumes, there's going to be heavy metal. Not to mention of all the personal care products that people tend to forget. You put something on your skin, what is it, like 20 seconds? You can track it in your bloodstream. So 20 to 30 seconds. So there's a lot of personal care products, lotions, and makeups are bad for this, where these metals are going straight into people's body, and it's accumulating at a higher rate due to poor metabolism. People more exhausted, premature aging will also do it as well, and it will create premature aging. So I think there's many things. Being overweight, naturally, these heavy metals love to sit in fat tissue. So I think over time in our modern world, we kind of turn into heavy metal sinks. It sounds like a very dark thing, but it's true. And that's not even to get into that. I know we could get into pharmaceuticals and all of that because that's actually a binding agent. Any other places other than if you have a client that's eating, cast iron frying pans?
Yeah, no, I think literally you can get it from all over the place. There's a reason that the government started limiting like lead-based paint. You know what I mean? We get it from all over the place.
Right.
So our foods, our environment, exhausts, healthcare products like you talked about, skincare products. Paint.
Yeah.
Lots of places. We can get it a lot of places.
So if we can now, we've established we all have there's a very high likelihood that all of us have some heavy metals. So now that that's why we're getting these people coming in with their heavy metal panels, and everybody has some, and they also have symptoms. However, I'm very quick to tell them that their symptoms may not be whatsoever associated with those heavy metals. So right. What would you tell that person? Because that's, I think, the kicker of this whole podcast.
Yeah, so I think that before you jump into the whole, I want a heavy metal panel, I want to do a heavy metal detox, I I usually encourage people to do a really, really thorough workup as far as lab work, just to make sure that that is actually what's going on with them. Because the last thing you want to do is try to do a heavy metal detox or do chelation therapy or whatever, if that is not the problem. Because if you do like the detox or you do the chelation therapy and it's not the problem, that can come with a whole other host of problems where it can actually cause even more side effects from that. So why don't you tell the listeners, what are some signs and symptoms of heavy metal toxicity?
Well, yeah. Well, I know there's a lot of them. I know you can lay out a lot of the neurological pieces, which maybe I'll get you to elaborate on that. But I see overall metabolism start to slow down. I see concentration difficulties. I have seen cases, it was a contributor to infertility. I've seen chronic aching and chronic pain that really, no one could really put the finger on it. Those are some of the things that I've seen. I have seen vision disturbances due to higher levels of metal and toxins in general. What have you seen, Dr. Kolby? I know you can get into the neuro piece with this.
Yeah. So one of the areas of your brain that is really, really susceptible to heavy metals is an area called your basal ganglia. I don't expect you guys to know what that is, but basically what you can look at the basal ganglia is it's a gas pedal and brake pedal that allows you to do movement and actually it helps you coordinate and process and initiate thoughts. So people who have heavy metal toxicity that is deposited in the brain, it can be in the form of like a movement disorder like Parkinson's, it can be all sorts of stuff. It can be excessive racing thoughts. It can be issues with self-regulation, all that kind of stuff. But I think that the main one that I've seen in my practice is the movement disorder part of it. So it can manifest as a tremor, or it can manifest itself as bradykinesia, which is really, really slow and labored movements. So someone getting out of a chair, really, really difficult for them to start walking, or they want to grab a glass off the table. It's difficult for them to initiate that actual arm movement. So those are the ones that I've seen most frequently in my clinic. Yeah. So those are the big ones.
Yeah. So now someone's listening to this and they're like, oh my goodness, I'm tired. I think I have a tremor. I have some concentration difficulties. I'm dealing with pain. Oh my goodness, it's got to be heavy metals. Well, if we do a heavy metal panel, yeah, there's going to be heavy metals. I put a bet on that one any day of the week. But the question is is the heavy metal the cause of the symptom? And something you touched on, Dr. Kolby, and you said, going into chelation and detox, and even before jumping on heavy metal testing to see if you have heavy metals in your body, it's probably going to come back positive and you're going to waste your money on that. What we've learned is if we can identify symptom onset of most heavy metal toxicity, not all of it, but most of it, is when your immune system is responding and reacting to that metal or that chemical. And there are panels that look for immune reaction to the metal or the chemical versus I just have the metal in my body. And what we're learning is identifying the reactivity. Is your immune system being alarmed? And identifying that metal or chemical as bad, that's when you can guarantee that there's a contributor to your symptom. So if I see somebody that does a panel that they say, oh, well, their body is reacting to the, cobalt or mercury in their body, there's an immune response to that. Well, then chances are if they're around mercury or cobalt, that's going to irritate them. So we want to look for all the sources in their environment. And then maybe going farther and looking, okay, is there cobalt and mercury in their body in substantial levels? And then with the safe, right, cautious approach, is it right for you to detox or try to remove these out of the body? And I want to get you to go into that, Dr. Kolby, the consequences of chelation therapy and heavy metal detox.
Yeah, I mean, one of the consequences and one of the concerns, like I really, it's something that I caution people against when they're like, oh, I'm going to do a heavy metal detox, is that if you are not careful and you are not optimized physiologically and you have a leaky blood-brain barrier, what can actually happen is that once you basically mobilize all of that heavy metal that's been stored somewhere else into the bloodstream, it can deposit somewhere else. And in some cases, it actually can go to the brain and deposit on the basal ganglia and cause movement disorders. So, at first you had all these symptoms. Oh, I have, fatigue, achy joints, all this stuff. I'm going to do a heavy metal detox, but you don't ensure that your blood-brain barrier is actually intact. and you do something like chelation therapy and it dumps all those heavy metals into the blood, that blood travels the brain, all that heavy metal basically leaches out of your blood into the brain, into the middle part of the basal ganglia, and then all of a sudden you have a tremor.
That's
so
right.
You're trying to get rid of all these other symptoms and issues that you're having, and then all of a sudden you have a really, really big one. Now, the problem with that is once you damage the basal ganglia, it's very, very frail. It doesn't come back. It doesn't regenerate. So it's like once you have it, it's very, very difficult to help manage those symptoms because once you get the tremor, it's basically there.
I did not know that. That's frightening. There's another reason for this podcast.
There you go.
So if somebody is listening to this and they're grasping for straws, we talked about this, Dr. Kolby, at the start. We're like, okay, why do people always want to do heavy metals? I always joke, the heavy metalers, the clinicians and the people that always want to do heavy metal. I guess they're looking for a reason, and heavy metals are associated with so many different symptoms, and it's got to be it. And then they find it. And then once they find this heavy metal, then there's a panic. Well, again, statistically, if you're living in this day and age, chances are you're going to have heavy metal unless you live at the North Pole. But there's, polar translocations. You probably have more heavy metals on the North Pole or the South Pole now. So you can't really hide from this. So looking at immune reactivity, but just to summarize, if I'm on the right page here, where you said, Dr. Kolby, about detoxification or chelation. So the body does a very, very good job of sequestering enemies. We could call these chemicals enemies. It does it in the lungs with tuberculosis. Remember, we in school we couldn't dissect lungs because it encapsulates tuberculosis. The in breast tissue. See, I've seen it all the time where if women have breast cancer tumors, if the body has the opportunity, it wants to wrap calcium deposits around the tumor.
It walls it off so it can't spread somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a defense mechanism to sequester. The same kind of analogy can be thought of with heavy metals. The body wants to keep it contained. And so there's where your metal is, and it's trying to keep it contained. Once it gets released, two things can happen. One, you expose it to the immune system because you're pulling it out of the body, and your immune system goes nuts, and then you turn on autoimmunity, you turn on immune reactivity, and then, as you said, Dr. Kolby, you can pull that metal, once it gets into the bloodstream, because that's the way it's going to detox, getting it out of the tissue, into the blood, and hopefully getting it out of the body. But once it's in, and it's highly volatile, and oned it gets into the blood, you talk about blood-brain barrier permeability and everything else, you're really, really playing with fire with that. So I guess if we're summarizing this podcast, be extra scared.
Be very cautious if you're going to try to do this. And if you're going to do this, you need to be with someone who's qualified, with someone who knows what they're doing, and with someone who's done it before.
Because
you don't want to be the guinea pig for something like this. Yeah, because it could turn out really, really well, or it could turn out really, really poorly.
That's exactly right. I have seen stories both ways. I have seen, and I don't do any of that chelation in my office. I don't touch that.
I don't either.
But I've seen people say, "Oh wow, this is it was remarkable." I have seen other people say they were never the same. Well, we have a colleague that blames chelation on one of their patients getting MS. So
and I in my office I don't do it either, and for a good reason, right? Very nervous about it. If they want a referral to someone who does the heavy metal toxicity, I'll write the referral, because I have seen a couple of different patients that came in with consequences of heavy metal toxicity where it actually got deposited on the brain, and that's why they came to me, is for the movement disorder part of it. So that's
the brain, so the brain was already
it was already warped.
The beast was already out.
Yeah, it
was already unlocked.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think to summarize, I guess, be cautious with heavy metals. And then another thing maybe we need to elaborate a little bit on more is, someone says, well, what do I do then? If I'm ever want to rule out, okay, maybe you guys said don't do heavy metal load. Looking to see if you have heavy metals in your body is probably just going to prove what we already assume. Going farther into and looking for heavy metal reactivity and chemical reactivity, you want to touch a little bit on that before we summarize?
Yeah, when we if I was to suspect that one of my patients was suffering from heavy metal toxicity and that their immune system was actually reacting to it, you can run a test that actually checks for IgGs, IgAs, and I think IgMs.
IgMs, yeah, GAs and M's.
And that shows if you are if it is there, which most of us it will be there, but it'll show if your immune system is actually sensitized to it and it's producing antibodies to it. So if there's an immunogenic response to the actual heavy metals and it's not just being sequestered in the tissue somewhere.
That's exactly right. And if your immune system is reacting to it, that's where the symptoms come from.
Yep,
it's not
absolutely.
necessarily just having the metal in the body. It can be, but not very common. Not very common at all, because our bodies are so amazing. It's trying to sequester it. So there'll be I'll put a link. There'll be a link in the description of a company by the name Cyrex and Cyrex Laboratories. I know you used them before, Dr. Kolby, lots. Cyrex Laboratories, there's a panel called Array 11, and they call their panels Array 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know. There's lots, 22. But this one's 11, and it's a chemical and metal reactivity screen. And it's looking at the most common chemicals and metals that we see in our environment. And it's a great indicator to see if you are... It's very consistent with the symptoms. If you're going to have a heavy metal symptom, there probably will be a reactivity. If you don't see reactivity, you could probably dismiss the metals as being a factor, and it's going to be something else. So yeah, so I'll put that in the description. Mm-hmm.
Good resource there in the description.
Yeah.
So if you have questions, go ahead and look there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, again, I know it's been kind of like concise to the point. But if you're having these symptoms, this is something that you're considering. Make sure that you get the appropriate help, and make sure that it's done safely, because you don't want to deal with the consequences if it's done inappropriately, because they're kind of permanent in many cases.
That's exactly right. So
if you guys got value from this, you guys want us to keep going, drop us. If you guys want us to cover a specific topic, you can get a hold of us at info@brainstormingwiththedocs.com is our email. Dr. Glenn has got a ton of resources on his website. His website is www.drgharrison.com. You can get on my website. My website is www.northlakescheropractic.com. And again, turn on notifications, hit like and subscribe, because we're going to keep rolling these things out in order to provide you guys with a little bit of value. Mm-hmm. And until next time, my man, we'll come up with a new and exciting topic and break that thing down.
We have a list. All right. It's great seeing you, Dr. Kolby.
All right, my man. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.